Welcome to Biology Made Easy. Today we are looking at roots morphology and structural adaptations, part 2. In part 1, we looked at all these roots. In part 2, we are looking at contractile roots, haustoria, mycorrhiza, root nodules, and root tubers. Welcome. What are contractile roots? These are large roots that grow on underground stems. Like this is plantain, this is underground stem, and these are large roots growing from them. Here is it. This is the plantain, the plant. This is the stem. These are the contractile roots. Very large and thick. Their function is to contract and pull the stem in the soil. The stem in the soil has the tendency of growing out, and the contractile roots keep them in the soil. Here we have contractile roots also in cocoyam. Here's the stem. Look at the roots, very thick. The same thing is found in ginger. These were very thick roots, but they are shriveled because they are dry. Contractile roots try to keep all these underground stems that have tendency of growing out of the soil, keeping them in the soil. Very, very neat. Good. Now let's move from contractile roots and look at parasitic plants. The first one we look at is Dodder, Casita. These spongy things we see here are plants, but they are parasitic. Here we have this Dodder, this sponge-like wiry stuff. It's a plant, parasitic. This plant is growing on the host. This is the host plant. This is the leaves of the host. And this wiry stuff grows, hooks on any part of the host. So we tried to remove part of this wiry thing, and this part, for instance, was attached to the host, part of the host, a small stem, all right? Well, looking at this again, some of the Dodder or Casita, they are very yellow, completely yellow, and those ones are complete parasites. They take nutrients, water, mineral salts, and food from the host. This one is a green one, so it's a semi-parasite. It will absorb water and mineral salts from this host plant on which it grows. And it uses what it attaches on the host onto it. This part, well, looking at the sucker, that's the part it uses to attach on the host. This is how it looks like. Flattened, kind of flat cap. All these flattened structures were on the host. This is the host plant. So this part, for instance, here, this area, which is twined around the host plant, will have these suckers. Some of these, they are suckers, flattened. These flattened areas that attach onto the host are actually adventitious roots. They are modified adventitious roots that attach on the host and then penetrate into the host tissue and absorb water and mineral salts. And if it's a complete parasite, which is yellow, it will also absorb food substances from the host tissue. So this is parasitic plants with suckers. Very neat. Now let's look at other parasitic plants which have no suckers but have haustorium. Mistletoe is one of them. It's a parasitic plant. Look at this tree. This tree, there's a branch of it that we've shown. These are its leaves, you see, bright green leaves, this. But this part of it is a parasite. It's a parasitic plant, mistletoe. All the dark bits there is the mistletoe growing on the host. So this is the host. So we come here. This is the dark green, is the mistletoe, the parasite. This is the host, some of the host leaves. This mistletoe can grow so thick and big and just absorbing water and mineral salts from the host. The mistletoe, you can always identify it with its nice flowers. These are its nice flowers. So you see, this mistletoe is growing on this host. This is flowers. Here we couldn't get any flower to show, but you could see that's a mistletoe. Here is the leaves of the host plant. You see, it has this leaf. Here is the leaf of the mistletoe. Look at it. And this is its flower. Well, let's look at the haustorium. That is the structure that the mistletoe attaches onto the host. So this mistletoe has some attachment structures that is hooked onto this host. And this is it. This is a haustorium. So this is part of the mistletoe. And this part, this swelling, is the part that the mistletoe uses to attach on the host. So if this part is the mistletoe, this part is the haustorium. It's a ball-like structure that is formed on the host branch, and it's actually adventitious roots. So it's modified adventitious roots. We believe when the plant starts small on the branch, then it will be growing into this structure, haustorium, growing big and big and big, and then it grows into the xylem, where it will take water and mineral salts from the xylem while it's using its green leaves to photosynthesize to make its own food. It's absorbing the food substances from the host. This is the host branch. And this haustorium of this mistletoe is stuck to it. So what happens is the mistletoe, as we have said, we looked at it here, it grows so huge. Because it grows very huge, with time, what does it do? It kills the host branch. These are haustorium. This is a haustorium, 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 haustorium. It grows many haustoria, and it kills the branch. And with time, it can kill the whole tree. So that is a haustorium of a mistletoe. It's actually a modified adventitious roots. Well, now let's look at another type of roots called Mycorrhiza. Mycorrhiza, as we have the definition here, means fungal roots. Now, mycorrhizae means symbiotic association between fungus and the roots of plants. This association is usually mutualistic. Each of the organisms in association gets something, benefits, but sometimes it can turn parasitic. So we are looking at mycorrhiza as it usually is. It's a mutualistic association between fungi and the roots of many plants. About 90% of plants have fungi associated with their roots. So when you see a fungus like this, even though this is small, it has a lot of hyphae in the soil. And if a plant grows around there, the hyphae will grow around the roots of the plant. Now, when hyphae are growing, some of the hyphae grow into the roots. Now, the fungus have spores in the soil, and some of the spores can even stay for many years and produce hyphae around the roots and grow into the roots. And that association where the fungus, hyphae, and the roots, each of them is benefiting, all right? They grow in the soil. They make the soil moist. Now we want to look at pictures of mycorrhiza. Here we have these plants, we have these roots. Hyphae is growing around these roots. This is a picture of a root. It's not too clear, but all these are hyphae. This area is hyphae. All right? The fungi grows around the roots. It grows extensively in the soil, and the hyphae, you know, they serve as root hairs. If a hyphae is growing around the root, this root has root hairs, but the hyphae too will serve as root hairs and will be absorbing water and mineral salts for the roots, for the plant. The root hairs will be absorbing water and mineral salts. The hyphae will also be absorbing water and mineral salts. But the hyphae are able to absorb a lot of phosphates for the plant. So let's look at how we have drawn out the association. So we have this mutualistic association, fungi here, roots of plants here. Mutualistic means each of them is benefiting, fungi and roots. So what happens is that water and mineral salts, especially phosphates, are absorbed by the fungi, and then the fungi is able to store water for the roots to use in dry season and high temperatures when there's very little water in the soil. And then the presence of the fungi makes the plant very nourished, and so it can resist infection. And then the hyphae also produce compounds that are toxic to pathogens. So the roots of the plants are so much protected by the presence of the fungi. So that's what the roots of the plants get. What does the fungi get? When the plant manufactures its carbohydrates, the fungi will also get the carbohydrates. That is why the association is mutualistic. Now, we want to look at how the fungi gets into the roots. Much of the fungi is extensively in the soil, but some also enter the roots. So here, the fungi in the soil, this is a section of a root showing the epidermis, showing the cortex, showing the endodermis. We didn't show the xylem, but it's here. All right. Now, here we can imagine this here, spores of fungi are here. They are growing. They grow hyphae in the soil. Some of the hyphae penetrate the epidermis and go through the cortex, and they enter through the intercellular spaces. They also enter through the cell walls. They go and get in through the cortex, but they do not penetrate the endodermis or the vascular system. You know, the endodermis has the Casparian strip we discussed in plant tissues. So the endodermis is very solid and protected. It doesn't allow anything that the plant doesn't need to go in. So the hyphae do not get through to the endodermis. But in the cortex, the hyphae form extensive structure in here for the plant, and so increases the surface area that the plant can absorb water. We will see how it does it. But here we are. When the hyphae penetrates in the epidermis and gets into the cortex, the hyphae forms a place called vesicle. It forms an area where a tube, a structure that it can store its nutrients. So the nutrients that the hyphae absorbs in the soil, water, mineral salts, phosphates, it stores some in this vesicle among the cortical cells. And so some of these substances, water, mineral salts, phosphates, can diffuse from the vesicle into the cells, all right? The substances. Then, besides the vesicles, the fungi also forms a structure called arbuscles here. This one. It's an area that a cell can be formed that is storing substances that the fungi has brought in, so that substances can be exchanged between the cells and the fungi. So the presence of the fungi helps the roots a lot, because the roots can be assured of water and mineral salts and phosphates. So even in dry season, A lot of fungi are in the soil here. We are imagining this is the soil with a lot of fungi, hyphae, a lot of hyphae. They are absorbing water. They make the soil moist for a long time. Some of the water and mineral salts come into the soil. So it increases the surface area for absorption of water and mineral salts and exchange of substances. So the mycorrhiza benefits the plants a lot. It makes plants flourish. Now, there are two types of mycorrhiza. There is ectomycorrhiza and endomycorrhiza. Now, the ectomycorrhiza produces a sheath around the roots, and then it generates the hyphae from the sheath, and the hyphae runs in between intercellular spaces in the ectomycorrhiza. The hyphae do not penetrate the cell walls. The hyphae just run through intercellular spaces and forms its vesicles and form its abuscicles. Now, but then there are also endomycorrhiza. This endomycorrhiza is the most common one. The hyphae penetrates and goes through the cell walls as well. So it can go through intercellular spaces, it can penetrate the cell walls, but it doesn't penetrate the cell membranes, all right? Only the cell walls. The ectomycorrhiza, endomycorrhiza, none of them penetrates the cell membranes, only through the cell walls and the intercellular spaces, and increases the surface area for absorption of water and mineral salts, and very rich. Now, mycorrhiza can be produced as an economic substance put in the soil to increase yield of plants. So it's a very, very, very important type of roots association, mycorrhiza. Well, now let's look at root nodules too. Root nodules is another type of roots. Here, they are usually found in leguminous plants like cowpeas and other leguminous plants. Now, the nodule, as the heading goes, root nodules, the nodules are swelling on the roots. So we see this is the roots of this groundnut plant, all right? Look at these roots. These are swellings. This one is a swelling. That's a root nodule. Here's another swelling, root nodule. Here's another swelling. These swellings are actually made up of root cortical cells and bacteria, all right? What they do is to absorb atmospheric nitrogen and turn it into ammonium for the roots to use. So the roots get ammonium. Very, very neat. Root nodule. Swellings on the roots. Cortex made up of cortical cells and bacteria. Now let's look at the association. Mutualistic between roots of these plants and rhizobium. Rhizobium is a gram-negative bacteria. Now, this rhizobium absorbs atmospheric nitrogen, turns into ammonium, salts for the roots to take, and the roots will use it to make carbohydrates and proteins, and the rhizobium will enjoy some. So it benefits both of them. As we have said, this is how it happens. The bacteria in the soil, rhizobium, penetrates the root hairs. And this is just a small illustration. It goes into the cortex, and then it causes the cortical cells, all right, to produce a lot of cells. It sort of generates them to multiply the cells very rapidly. And then the bacteria will be in there, also increasing in numbers, and very soon a nodule, that lump we saw, will be formed. It's just a multiplication of cortical cells with bacteria inside that has swollen to form a nodule, and the bacteria is there. They have the ability, even there in the nodule, as we go to look back at the nodule, even they are here in the soil, but they are able to absorb atmospheric nitrogen for the roots. Very neat. Good. Now let's look at root tubers. When we say root tubers, they actually mean lateral or adventitious roots swollen with food. We talked about lateral roots or adventitious roots in our last lesson. So you can check the last lesson to find out what lateral or adventitious roots means. These are the root tubers. It's very, very different from tap roots swollen with food. And this is tap roots, carrots, tap roots swollen with food. So this brings us to the end of the lesson for today. Thank you. In our next lesson, we will look at adaptations of roots, and it is structural adaptation. So till we meet in our next lesson, thank you very much. Goodbye.